They found the nurse's body in the elevator shaft, 12 floors below, her face frozen in a scream she never had time to finish. There was no blood, no broken bones, just that expression, raw terror-like. She'd seen something that tore the sanity right out of her. The police sealed off the hospital and called it an accident. The city called it bad luck, but the people who worked the night shift whispered the same thing. It happened again. Halewood Medical Center wasn't supposed to be open. The main building had been abandoned for nearly 40 years after a fire gutted its east wing and claimed 27 lives, patients, doctors, and children from the pediatric ward. But a skeleton crew still staffed the emergency section for legal reasons, and that meant someone had to patrol the old floors at night. Claire Thompson didn't believe in ghosts. She took the job for the paycheck. 12 hours later, she would see something in the dark that made her pray for the same death as the nurse. In the elevator shaft, rain swept across the small town of Fairview in thin, cold sheets. Claire Thompson parked her Corolla in the half-empty lot of St. Mary's Medical Center and sat for a moment, staring at the building. The hospital's brick walls were weather-stained, its upper windows dark except for one, where a faint light flickered. Above the entrance, the faded sign swayed slightly in the wind, creaking like a loose hinge. She stepped out, pulling her coat tighter. The air smelled of wet asphalt, disinfectant, and something metallic beneath it. The automatic doors slid open with a hiss. Inside, harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A lone vending machine blinked in the corner, its hum filling the empty lobby. Claire Thompson, the receptionist, Marjorie, according to her tag, stood behind the desk, smiling faintly. "You're on Ward B and the old wing tonight. Old wing's closed, but you'll need to check it during rounds." Claire signed the forms, the metal keys cold in her palm. Marjorie led her down a corridor where the air grew cooler. To the left, the main ward glowed warmly. To the right stretched a dim hallway. "That's the old wing," Marjorie said. "You'll hear stories. Ignore them. And if you hear voices or footsteps, sound carries strangely here at night." By 11 p.m., Claire settled in, checking patients, updating charts, sharing coffee with Ethan, the quiet night guard. At 3 a.m., she decided to make her first round through the old wing. The corridor was colder. The walls a faded green, paint bubbled in spots. Her footsteps echoed unnaturally. Passing room 204, she noticed a reddish-brown smear outside the door. She reached room 206. The door was shut. The small glass window showed only darkness. The key in her pocket felt heavier, but she moved on. At the nurse's station, dust coated the counters, old memos curling on the corkboard. Turning back, she saw movement in the glass ahead, a tall figure at the far end of the hall. She froze. Lifting her flashlight, the beam sliced the dark. The hallway was empty. Claire walked toward the main ward, forcing her steps steady. Behind her, the echo of her footsteps followed, perfectly intimate until one more step landed after hers. She didn't look back. The old wing smelled different. Claire noticed it the moment she stepped in for her second night shift, something sharper than the faint mildew she'd smelled before, almost like the air inside a closet that had been sealed for years. The hallway lights here were dim and uneven, some buzzing, others dead entirely. Her flashlight beam cut through the shadows, picking out the warped linoleum and patches of peeling paint. She started with room 201 empty, save for an overturned chair in the corner. The windows were bolted shut, glass clouded by years of grime. Room after room, she found the same: abandoned beds, scattered papers, forgotten medical equipment. Dust lay thick on everything, muffling even the sound of her footsteps. At room 206, she stopped. The door was shut tight, the small wired glass window opaque with dirt. She shone her light inside but saw nothing. The doorknob felt colder than the surrounding air. She told herself she was imagining it and kept walking. At the end of the corridor, she found the nurse's station. Old binders slumped on sagging shelves. A corkboard still held yellowed memos from the 1970s, medication schedules, handwritten notes, and one typewritten incident report about unusual patient behavior. The last line was blacked out with a thick marker. She was flipping through one of the binders when a sound came from behind her, a faint scraping, like something being dragged across the floor. She turned sharply, flashlight beam sweeping the hallway. Nothing moved. The sound came again, closer this time. Claire stepped into the corridor, her shoes crunching on something brittle, fragments of glass. She didn't remember seeing them before. The scraping stopped. Silence pressed in around her, the kind that makes you aware of your own breathing. She was halfway back toward Ward B when she noticed the smear just outside room 204. A fresh reddish-brown streak curved across the floor toward the wall. She crouched to examine it. The smell was faint but unmistakable iron. Her radio crackled in her pocket, making her jump. "Everything okay down there?" Ethan's voice came through, distorted by static. She hesitated before answering. "Yeah, just checking rooms." Static hissed again, but she could have sworn she heard another voice layered beneath Ethan's, a whisper, too faint to make out. By the time she reached the main ward, her skin felt cold all over. She told herself it was just the air down there. She couldn't shake the feeling that something in the old wing had started paying attention to her. It was 1:43 a.m. when the sound came. Claire was at the nurse's desk in Ward B, updating a chart, when the ceiling speaker above her crackled. Static. Then, a voice, small, shaky, unmistakably that of a child. "Help me, I can't breathe." The pen slipped from her hand. She stared up at the speaker, the sound freezing her in place. The voice came again, weaker this time. "Please, it's cold." Claire grabbed her radio. "Ethan, did you hear that?" "No, hear what?" His tone was calm but edged with suspicion. The intercom there was a kid's voice asking for help. There was a pause. Then Ethan said, "Claire, the intercom in the old wing hasn't worked since the 80s. It's not even connected." Her pulse kicked up. "I'm going down there." "Not alone," Ethan said quickly. "I'll meet you at the juncture." By the time they met, the voice had gone silent. Together they walked into the old wing, their flashlights slicing through the gloom. The hallway was dead quiet, except for the faint drip of water somewhere in the distance. They stopped at the small intercom box mounted on the wall near room 208. Its metal surface was rusted, the speaker grill bent inward. "No power," Ethan muttered, tapping it. The device hung loosely, wires dangling inside. "See, completely dead." Claire's flashlight beam drifted toward the floor. There was something there, small, pale, almost hidden in the dust. She crouched. It was a shoe, a child's shoe, scuffed and worn, the kind with a faded cartoon print. Ethan frowned. This ward was psych, patients only, no children. Claire didn't answer. She was staring at the door to room 210, ajar by an inch, though she remembered it being closed last night. She stepped forward, pushing it open. The beam of her flashlight swept over a bare room, metal bed frame, overturned stool, peeling wallpaper, and then movement in the far corner. JOC froze. Something was there, crouched low, its outline barely visible. "Hello." Her voice came out more breath than sound. The shape lifted its head. For a split second, she thought she saw a pale face, eyes too large. Before the light flickered and it was gone. Just empty wall. Ethan touched her arm. "Let's go." Back in the main ward, Claire couldn't stop thinking about that voice. She went to the old records room on the 3rd floor, where boxes of yellowed files lined the shelves. Hours later, she found it, a newspaper clipping from June 12, 1980. Hospital fire claims. 9 lives, subheading. Victims were psychiatric patients. Under investigation, the article listed names, mostly adults, but near the bottom, one stood out. Sarah L., age 8, cause of death, smoke inhalation. There was no explanation for what an 8-year-old had been doing in the old wing. Claire sat back, the air suddenly heavy in the room. Somewhere deep in the building, a faint crackle of static drifted through the walls, and just before it faded, so soft she almost thought she imagined it, came the whisper, "Claire." Ethan was waiting for her in the small security office, a cramped room that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and dust. The wall was lined with 6 flickering monitors, each showing a different corner of the hospital. "You need to see this," he said, rewinding the tape from the night before. Claire leaned in. The footage was grainy, time-stamped 1:43 a.m. the exact time she'd heard the voice over the intercom. On the screen, the camera in the old wing hallway showed nothing at first, just the long, dim corridor, debris scattered across the floor. Then, at the far end of the hall, a shadow moved. It wasn't the shadow of a person. It was thin, elongated, its shape stretching unnaturally, as if the light itself was bending. The figure stopped near room 210, exactly where she had seen the crouched shape. Slowly, its head tilted toward the camera. The pixels scrambled for a moment, distorting the image into a mess of static. When the picture cleared, The hallway was empty again. That's impossible, Claire whispered. Wait, Ethan said. Scrubbing forward a few seconds, the figure appeared again, this time closer to the lens, as if it had jumped forward in space. The face was pale, featureless, and yet the darkness around where its eyes should be seemed to look back at them. Claire felt her stomach tighten. Ethan paused the frame. This was right after you said you heard the voice. Whatever it is, it knows you're here. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier. One of the other monitors, camera 3, covering the stairwell, flickered suddenly. On the screen, a small shape darted past the bottom of the stairs. A child. It was quick, almost too quick to see. But Claire caught the outline. Short hair, white hospital gown, bare feet. Rewind, she said sharply. They watched again, slower this time. The child stopped at the base of the stairs and looked up straight into the camera. Her lips moved, but there was no sound. The image glitched, and the frame repeated, over and over, as if stuck. Ethan tapped the screen. This isn't possible. Those cameras are hardwired. No interference. A sudden click broke the silence. It came from the intercom speaker in the corner of the security office. Static. Then that same small, trembling voice. Don't let him find me. Claire's skin prickled. Who? She whispered, as if the voice could hear. The reply was a long, shuddering breath. Then bang. A deafening sound from somewhere down the hall, like a door slamming shut. Ethan grabbed his flashlight. We're checking it out. They moved quickly, their footsteps echoing in the deserted corridor. The sound had come from near the old pediatric ward, a place neither of them had reason to enter. The door to the ward was ajar. Inside, moonlight filtered through cracked windows, illuminating rows of small, empty beds. A mobile of faded paper stars hung from the ceiling, swaying gently though the air was still. On one bed lay a VHS tape. Claire picked it up. There was no label, just black plastic with a strip of dust. Back in the security office, they popped it into the old player. The screen showed shaky, handheld footage. A man's voice muttered in the background, too low to make out. The camera panned across the same pediatric ward they had just visited, but this was decades earlier. The beds were occupied by children in hospital gowns, some sitting up, others lying still. The cameraman stopped at one bed where a little girl sat cross-legged, clutching a stuffed rabbit. She looked directly into the lens. It was the same girl from the stairwell footage. The girl opened her mouth to speak, and the tape cut to black. The hospital's basement was never part of Claire's duties. On her first night, Ethan had warned her, if you value your sleep, stay away from there. Tonight, that warning felt more like an invitation. The VHS tape still lay on the desk, its blank face catching the flicker of the monitors. Claire couldn't stop replaying the girl's voice in her head. Don't let him find me. Where does the stairwell lead after the old wing? She asked. Ethan hesitated. Down to the boiler room, storage, and the morgue. But it's all sealed off. Then why is there fresh dust on the handle? She said quietly, pointing at the grainy live feed from camera 6. It showed the basement access door slightly ajar. Ethan sighed, grabbing a ring of keys. Fine, but if we hear anything we leave. She finished for him. The stairwell smelled of rust and wet concrete. Their footsteps echoed unnaturally, each sound bouncing back distorted, as if the space below was swallowing it. At the bottom, the hallway split in two, one direction toward the boiler room, the other toward the old morgue. The walls here were lined with chipped white tiles, smeared with something dark. Blood, Claire whispered. Ethan crouched, running a gloved finger across the stain. No rust, I think, but his voice lacked conviction. From deeper in the morgue hallway came a faint sound, not footsteps, more like dragging, slow, deliberate. Claire's pulse quickened. Someone's down here. They followed the sound until they reached a set of heavy metal doors. One hung slightly open, revealing the morgue beyond. Rows of empty gurneys, cold drawers lining the walls, and a flickering fluorescent light that buzzed like an angry insect. In the center of the room stood a figure. At first, Claire thought it was a mannequin, tall, thin, dressed in a filthy white coat. Then it turned its head, and she saw its eyes, two bottomless black pits. Ethan's flashlight stuttered as the bulb dimmed. The figure tilted its head, mimicking the movement Claire had seen on the security footage. She couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. The figure raised one skeletal hand and pointed, not at them, but at one of the cold drawers along the wall. Without knowing why, Claire stepped forward. Her fingers shook as she gripped the handle and slid the drawer open. Inside lay a small body wrapped in a child-sized hospital gown. The skin was pale, lips blue. In one stiff hand was a stuffed rabbit. Claire's throat tightened. It was the girl from the tape. Her eyes snapped open. The scream that followed wasn't human. It was layered, one voice of a child, another of something ancient and furious, tearing through the air like broken glass. The figure in the coat dissolved into shadow, swirling around the room and plunging it into near darkness. Claire grabbed Ethan's arm. Run. They stumbled back into the hallway, the sound of dragging now behind them. Faster, closer. Something cold brushed Claire's shoulder-thin fingers, almost weightless but burning against her skin. They reached the stairwell and slammed the door shut, Ethan jamming a metal rod through the handle. For a moment, the basement was silent. Then came a pounding, slow and deliberate, as if whatever was down there knew the door wouldn't hold forever. Back in the security office, both of them were shaking. The monitors were alive with static, except for camera 6, the basement feed. On the screen, the door they had just locked stood still. Then, slowly, it opened by itself. The girl stepped out, holding her stuffed rabbit. She looked up into the camera, her lips moving again. Claire leaned in, reading the silent words. "He's coming for you next." The feed cut to black. The pounding from the basement door still echoed in Claire's head, though they were back in the security office. Ethan was pacing, muttering under his breath. His hands trembled as he flipped through the logbook, scanning for anything unusual. "We can't just sit here waiting for it to come upstairs," Claire said, her voice low but steady. Ethan stopped pacing. "If we want answers, we need to check the records room. Old files, patient histories, everything the administration buried when they shut the old wing down." The records room was down the west corridor, past the row of unused offices. Most were empty, but one door caught Claire's attention, painted dark green, with a peeling sign that read "Interrogation Room 2. "This isn't on the floor map," she said. "It's not supposed to be. That room was used decades ago, before the hospital changed hands, not for patients, for questioning staff when something went wrong." Ethan replied, glancing at it warily. The door was locked, but Ethan's keys made short work of it. Inside, the air was stale and cold. A single table stood in the center, bolted to the floor. 2 metal chairs faced each other. The walls were lined with faded soundproofing panels, some torn to reveal dark stains beneath. A single flickering light bulb swung overhead. In the far corner sat a filing cabinet, dented and rusted. Claire pulled it open, and the smell of mildew hit her. Inside were folders, each stamped with the same word in red, "Confidential." She pulled one free. Inside were grainy black and white photographs, not of patients, but of staff, doctors, nurses, janitors. Some looked terrified, others vacant. On the back of each was a name and a date. The earliest photo was dated 1973, the latest to 1998. Ethan took another folder. His face went pale. "Claire, look at this." The photo he held showed the tall, thin man in the white coat they had seen in the morgue. His eyes were the same black voids, even in the old print. The name beneath read, "Dr. Harold Grayson." "Who is he?" Claire asked. Ethan skimmed the accompanying report. "Head surgeon, accused of dozens of disappearances inside the hospital. Patients, staff, even children from the pediatric ward. Never convicted. Officially, he resigned and left the city. But the investigation notes say there was no record of him anywhere after that." Claire flipped to the last page. There was a handwritten note in shaky script. "He works at night. He knows the walls better than anyone. He will never leave." A sound broke the silence, a faint click. The light bulb above them swayed harder, though the air was still. Claire turned toward the doorway. A shadow stood there, taller than the frame itself. Dr. Grayson stepped inside, silent, his face half hidden in darkness. His white coat was torn and streaked with something black. In his hand, he held a scalpel, the blade catching the flicker of the bulb. Ethan's hand went for his flashlight, but it sputtered and died. Grayson's head tilted slowly, just like before, and the air in the room seemed to thicken. Claire's breath came shallow. She could hear something faint under the electric hum of the light. Whispers, hundreds of them, overlapping, coming from the walls themselves. The whispers grew louder, forming words. "Don't let him take you downstairs." Grayson took a step forward. Claire's survival instincts kicked in. She grabbed the nearest chair and hurled it toward him. The metal leg scraped across the floor, but when it struck him, it passed through. As if hitting smoke, Ethan yanked her toward the door. They stumbled into the hallway, but the lights there were already dimming in sequence, each one going out as though chasing them. They ran until they reached the records room. Ethan slammed the door and wedged a chair under the handle. In the corner of the records room was an old reel-to-reel recorder, the kind used decades ago. It was already spinning, though no one had touched it. A child's voice came through the speakers. It was the girl again. "He doesn't like this room. He can't hear us here. Find my name." Claire and Ethan began rifling through stacks of dusty folders, tossing aside irrelevant files. Claire's hands finally froze on one, a thin folder with no official markings. Inside was a single page, a pediatric admission form. Name: Emily Carter, age 9. Status: deceased. Cause of death: listed as cardiac arrest. Date: the same night Dr. Harold Grayson vanished. On the back of the page was a crude drawing of the hospital, done in a child's shaky hand. One area of the basement was circled in red crayon. Beside it, in childish letters, "My room." Claire looked up at Ethan. "She's not just a random ghost. She was one of his victims." The recorder clicked off by itself. From the hallway came a faint sound. Not footsteps this time, the slow, metallic drag of a scalpel across the wall. Ethan's voice was barely above a whisper. "He's found us again." The scraping outside the records room stopped as suddenly as it began. Claire and Ethan stood, frozen, listening. The silence was worse than the sound. It meant he was waiting. Claire's grip tightened on the folder. "The map she drew. It's in the basement. We have to go." Ethan shook his head. "That's exactly where he wants us. She's trying to help. She saved us in the morgue, in the interrogation room. If we ignore her, we're not getting out of here." The decision came down to movement or waiting for the thing to come through the door. They chose movement. Ethan pushed the chair away and opened the door to a hallway swallowed by shadows. The emergency lights barely lit the path. They retraced their steps toward the basement stairs, each step echoing against the walls. When they reached the stairwell, the air felt heavier, like the atmosphere itself was pressing them downward. The steps groaned under their weight as they descended. The basement was different now. The corridor seemed longer, the walls closer. Moisture dripped from overhead pipes, and the smell of rust and something fouler clung to the air. They followed the crude map from Emily's file, passing the morgue without looking inside. Every so often, Claire swore she saw movement at the edge of the dim light. Not footsteps this time, more like someone leaning just beyond her vision. Watching. At the end of the corridor stood a door, unlike the others. Its surface was deep crimson. The paint bubbled and cracked. No handle, just a single keyhole. Ethan searched his ring of keys, finding one small and blackened with age. The metal felt unnaturally cold. He inserted it into the lock, and the door clicked open. Inside, the walls were painted the same deep red, but not with paint. The room was small, barely large enough for the single iron bed in the center. Restraint straps hung loosely from the bed frame. Chains bolted to the floor rattled softly, though no one had touched them. In one corner sat a child's wooden chair. On it was a doll missing one eye, its porcelain face cracked. The air was thick, almost unbreathable. Claire stepped forward, her voice barely audible. "Emily." The light in the room flickered. When it steadied, a small figure stood at the foot of the bed, a girl in a pale hospital gown, her hair hanging over her face. She didn't move. "You found my room," the child said. Her voice was soft but carried in the stillness. Claire swallowed. "We want to help you. Tell us what to do." The girl lifted her head. One eye was wide and human, the other black as ink. "He hurt me here. He still comes back. You have to burn this place." Ethan glanced around. "If we burn it, we'll trap ourselves." The girl's expression didn't change. "It's the only way to make him leave." From behind them came a sound, the soft, deliberate tap of a scalpel on the doorframe. Dr. Grayson stepped into the room, the dim light bending around him like he absorbed it. His shadow stretched unnaturally along the floor, reaching toward them. Ethan moved in front of Claire. "Go, I'll distract him." Grayson didn't rush. He simply advanced one step at a time, the scalpel glinting. Claire spotted a small metal cabinet against the wall. Inside were dusty jars labeled with chemicals, ethanol, formalin. She grabbed two, smashing one against the bed frame and splashing the other across the floor. The air filled with the sharp burn of fumes. Grayson stopped and tilted his head, as if curious. Emily's voice rose, louder than before. Now, Claire flicked her lighter. The flame caught instantly, racing along the floor and up the bed. Heat surged in seconds. Grayson's shadow writhed, pulling back from the fire, but his figure remained in the doorway, watching. The doll on the chair began to burn, its porcelain face warping in the heat. The chains rattled violently. Emily stood perfectly still, the flames rising around her, and for the first time she smiled. "Thank you," she whispered. The fire roared, forcing Claire and Ethan toward the far wall. Smoke thickened, choking them. There was no other exit, but the wall behind the bed looked brittle, plaster crumbling from years of damp. Ethan grabbed a length of pipe from the floor and slammed it into the wall. It gave way after 3 blows, revealing a narrow passage. They crawled through as the fire consumed the room. Behind them, Claire caught one last glimpse of Grayson standing in the flames, untouched, his eyes locked on hers. They stumbled into a side hallway, coughing and gasping for air. The heat followed, but the fire couldn't spread beyond the red room. It was as if the flames knew their purpose and had completed it. Claire leaned against the wall, still clutching Emily's folder. "Do you think it worked?" Ethan shook his head, breathing hard. "I don't know, but if it didn't, we're running out of places to hide." Somewhere deep in the hospital, a single child's laugh echoed. It wasn't playful, it was waiting. The hallway was colder than the basement had been, as if the fire in the red room had stolen all its warmth and left behind a hollow chill. Claire and Ethan pressed forward, both coughing from the smoke that still clung to their lungs. The lights here were brighter than anywhere else they had been in the hospital, but they flickered in a steady, unnatural rhythm, as though responding to an unseen pulse. At the end of the corridor was a heavy metal door with a sign reading "Service Exit." Ethan rushed to it, shoving the panic bar, but the door refused to budge. He slammed his shoulder against it once, twice, but it was as immovable as a wall. Claire stepped closer, running her fingers along the seam. "It's sealed from the outside, maybe chained." Before Ethan could respond, a distant metallic clang echoed behind them. Something was moving, dragging itself closer. The sound of boots on concrete followed, steady and deliberate. Claire turned, her pulse spiking. "We don't have time. We need another way." They scanned the corridor. On the right, a set of double doors marked operating theater stood slightly ajar. Claire grabbed Ethan's arm and pulled him inside. The operating room was cold enough to make their breath visible. Surgical instruments were laid out neatly on a metal tray, as though waiting for the next procedure. The smell of antiseptic was strong, but beneath it lingered the metallic scent of blood. In the center of the room stood an operating table. Leather straps dangled from its sides. A surgical lamp above flickered, and for a moment the light was too bright, forcing Claire to shield her eyes. When she looked again, the table was no longer empty. Emily lay there, her gown torn, her wrists bound to the straps, her head turned toward Claire. "He's coming. If you stay, he'll take you, too." Ethan stepped forward, his voice low. "Where's the way out?" Emily's gaze shifted to the far wall. "Behind the cabinets, there's a service tunnel, but you have to run before he sees you." The sound of boots grew louder, now accompanied by the faint scrape of metal. Claire and Ethan shoved the tall steel cabinets aside, revealing a narrow door with peeling paint. Ethan pulled it open to find a cramped tunnel lit by a single swinging bulb. Claire hesitated, looking back at Emily. "Come with us." Emily shook her head. "I can't leave. This is where I died, but you can end it." Before Claire could answer, the operating room door creaked open. Dr. Grayson stepped inside, his white coat blackened from the smoke, his scalpel still in hand. His face was calm, but his eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. Ethan yanked Claire into the tunnel and slammed the door. They ran, hunched over, the low ceiling forcing them to move awkwardly. The air was damp and smelled of mildew. Behind them, the door to the tunnel burst open. Heavy steps followed. The sound was wrong, too fast, too close. The tunnel angled upward, and a faint light appeared ahead. Claire's legs burned, but she didn't slow. They reached a rusted ladder leading to a hatch. Ethan climbed first, shoving at the metal. It groaned but didn't move. "He's right behind us," Claire said, her voice trembling. Ethan braced himself and slammed his shoulder into the hatch. It gave way with a deafening crack, letting in the cool night air. He scrambled out and pulled Claire up after him. They emerged in the hospital's overgrown courtyard. the building looming behind them like a living thing. The windows glowed faintly, and in several of them, shadowy figures stood watching. Ethan grabbed Claire's hand, pulling her toward the perimeter fence. It was topped with rusted barbed wire, but a section near the corner had been cut. They slipped through, tearing their clothes but not stopping until they reached the street. Only then did they turn back. The hospital stood silent, its windows now dark. The street was empty. No cars, no people, just the hum of distant power lines. Claire clutched Emily's folder. "We have to tell someone, the police, the press, anyone." Ethan shook his head. "No one will believe us. And if we go back, we won't come out again." A faint movement caught Claire's eye. At the far end of the street, a tall figure stood under a broken street lamp. Even from the distance, she recognized the outline of the coat, the glint of metal in his hand. Dr. Grayson didn't move toward them. He simply stood there, watching. Then the light above him flickered and went out, leaving the spot empty. Ethan exhaled slowly. "We're not free, are we?" Claire didn't answer. She only tightened her grip on the folder and started walking, knowing that no matter how far they went, the hospital and the man inside it would never be truly behind them. From somewhere, far off, barely louder than the wind, came the sound of a child's laugh. 2 weeks later, the rain had not stopped. It poured over the city in a grey, endless sheet, making every building look like it was dissolving into the sky. Claire sat in her apartment with the curtains drawn and the lights dimmed, a mug of coffee cooling untouched beside her. On the table lay the folder she had taken from the hospital, its edges warped from the damp the night they escaped. She had tried to read it twice before, but each time the words seemed to blur, her eyes stinging until she had to stop. Tonight, she decided she would finish it. The folder contained medical records dating back over 60 years, patients who had been admitted for minor injuries but never discharged. Their names, ages, and conditions were typed neatly, followed by a single date in the outcome column. That date always matched the day they had been admitted. Emily's file was near the top. The photo was in black and white, but Claire recognized the sharp eyes and small smile. The record claimed she had died of severe respiratory failure during a routine checkup. Claire knew that was a lie. Near the back of the folder was a section labeled Staff. She hesitated before flipping the page. Dr. Jonathan Grayson's face stared back at her, younger but unmistakable. His employment date was listed as 1953. The date of termination column was blank. A sudden knock on her door made her freeze. She wasn't expecting anyone. She waited, listening. The knock came again, slow and deliberate. 3 times. Claire stood, heart pounding, and moved toward the peephole. The hallway outside was empty. She locked the deadbolt and turned away, but her phone buzzed on the table, the screen lit with a new email from an address she didn't recognize. Service.records at HALEWOOD medical.org. The subject line read, appointment confirmation. Her fingers shook as she opened it. Dear Ms. Claire Thompson, your follow-up appointment has been scheduled for Thursday, 11 p.m. Please arrive promptly. Late arrivals will not be admitted. Location, Halewood Medical Center, Operating Theater 3. Regards, Dr. J. Grayson. The coffee mug tipped over, spilling across the table and soaking the papers, but Claire didn't move to stop it. She deleted the email, turned off her phone, and stuffed the folder into a plastic bag, intending to burn it. That night, she dreamed of the hospital. She was walking its empty corridors, hearing the hum of the lights above. Every door she passed was closed except one, which stood wide open. Inside was the operating table, and on it lay Ethan, his chest rising and falling as though asleep. Dr. Grayson stood beside him, looking up at her. "You're late," he said. Claire woke with her mouth dry and her heart hammering. She was in her bed, but the smell of antiseptic hung in the air. In the kitchen, the plastic bag with the folder was gone. In its place on the table lay a fresh medical chart. Her name was printed at the top. Below it, in neat handwriting, was a date, Thursday. Rain pattered against the window. Somewhere outside, in the street below, came the sound of 3 slow knocks on metal.
Thank you for following.